The first item of the agenda is for the Office of the State Auditor on their tax increment financing legislative report. Mr. Nord, please introduce yourself for the record and proceed with your presentation.
Sure. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can hear you just fine.
Very good. Well, thank you, Madam Chair. My name for the record is Jason Nord. I'm the TIF Division Director at the Office of the State Auditor, and thank you for having me. I'll be giving a brief overview of tax increment financing and some of the issues that you might encounter as a committee, while also sharing information from our new legislative report that was released last week. There's also a handout of the material I'm covering in case I move a little bit fast here. There's a lot of things I could potentially go on and on about, so I'll try and move quickly. So first, our role at the Office of the State Auditor is to provide oversight of tax increment financing, and we do that by collecting annual reporting. We collect over 1,600 reports for over 1,600 districts from over 400 TIF authorities, along with a couple hundred other filings each year. Statute authorizes us to examine the use of tax increment financing, and we largely work with authorities more informally to kind of identify and work through issues and help remedy any problems that pop up, although we are also able to provide more formal notices of non-compliance when the situation calls for it, and those are included in the legislative report. There was one of those in this year's report. But I think an important part of improving compliance with tax increment financing laws is to provide training and education to help authorities understand the complexities of TIF and how to stay in compliance. So that's an important aspect of what we do as well. What is TIF? TIF is a financing tool primarily for redevelopment, housing, and economic development. It's not a tax break. The taxpayers of developed property pay their full taxes, but the taxes on the new value finance development activity instead of local levies. So the new net tax capacity generated in a TIF district does not support local government levies for city schools and counties. It instead finances the activities. And if I enlarge this example here, you can see an example where maybe before development, you might have a blighted commercial space with an original net tax capacity of, say, $3,250. And perhaps the new development will add a substantial amount of new net tax capacity. So it's important to understand that in the eyes of the tax base, the property for the duration of the district remains kind of the $3,250 of value, and that additional value is not part of the tax base for the full duration of the TIF district.
Mr. Nord, I'm just going to quick interrupt just to remind folks that you can go to the speaker view so that you could see Mr. Nord's presentation. And I have to say, Office of the State Auditor for the win. Already it's a more creative presentation than we've had than sharing your screen. So thank you.
Well, I have to give credit to State Auditor Blaha. She's found this tool and has encouraged us to use it as well. So it's kind of fun to go through it this way. Although I don't need to be on camera. But it is what it is. It's important then to understand that TIF impacts all local taxing jurisdictions and not just the jurisdiction that is using it. So it might be a little bit different than the tax abatement program in that regard. The captured value in a TIF district is excluded when tax rates are calculated, and that's so that the local levies the tax rates will raise the entire local levies. The local jurisdictions aren't shorted at all, but it means there's additional taxes being levied above and beyond what the levies are, and those are the tax increments. So the merits of TIF really hinge on what's called a but-for test. And when a municipality decides it wants to make use of tax increment financing, it has to be able to come to the conclusion that but for the use of TIF, the development would not occur. And if that's true, then that means that there's really no stress on tax base and tax rates because the value wouldn't exist anyway. And so it wouldn't cause a problem. But if that test doesn't hold up very well, and if some of that value would have occurred without TIF, then the use of TIF is potentially putting strain on tax base and tax rates, and maybe not as good of a thing. And so TIF is really meant to address market failures such as blight and the undersupply of affordable housing by the market. It's not meant to just assist with any development projects that come along. This graphic shows the municipalities that are using TIF are called TIF authorities. And these maps show where TIF authorities are located. You can see they're spread all across the state. Basically every city over almost every city over 5,000 and a large number of small cities either have used or are using TIF. And there's even a dozen or so county HRAs that make use of TIF. So it's pretty widespread. This graphic shows the process of creating a TIF district, and it begins with drafting a TIF plan. That plan then must be shared with the county and the school district to get their comments and feedback, although the municipality is not bound at all by that feedback, except for perhaps in certain circumstances where county road costs have to be included. But beyond that, they have to publish a notice for a public hearing to give the public an opportunity to weigh in on a proposed use of TIF. And once that hearing occurs, then the municipality can approve the plan. And at that time, they request certification by the county auditor so that the county auditor can get it all set up in the tax system. And they send a copy of the TIF plan to us and a copy to the Department of Revenue. There's a couple of topics or subjects that come up frequently that with issues, and the biggest of those is pooling, which is maybe a little bit of a strange term. Pooling refers to the spending of increment outside the TIF district, but within a broader project area. The statutes that allow the use of TIF also create project areas which can be very large, even the whole city. But the TIF districts generally are a parcel or a few parcels where the development is occurring, and that generates the tax increments. So there are some limits on pooling. The overall limit is for a redevelopment district, up to 25% of tax increment can be pooled outside the district. For all other district types, it's 20%. There's also a 5-year rule that puts a timing parameter on it. So generally speaking, in order for expenditures to be considered in district, they have to be incurred or obligated within the first 5 years. So if after the first 5 years you identify new spending, that has to fit within your pooling limits. And there's a corresponding 6-year rule to the 5-year rule that says beginning in the 6th year, on an annual basis, the in-district share of increments must be spent on the in-district obligations. And once there's sufficient increment to pay those obligations, generally speaking, the district must be decertified. So it promotes early decertification. Another topic that can get a little bit confusing is the idea of decertification. Decertification is when the TIF district is terminated, meaning it'll no longer create any more tax increments. But that doesn't mean the TIF district is really done. The TIF district must continue to comply and report to us until tax increment is either properly spent or returned. So like out of the 1,600 TIF districts that reported in 2019, over 200 of them were reporting for decertified districts. I could go on forever about the history of TIF, but very briefly, it might be helpful to understand that the TIF Act was created in 1979 to provide common procedures and basic limitations on the use of TIF. And that caused the use of TIF to explode throughout the 80s and 90s. And the legislature had significant concerns and annually was dealing with TIF issues and passed numerous reforms over those 2 decades, including some big reforms in the 1990s. And then in 2001, the tax reform changed the dynamic between TIF and school aids. Prior to that, when jurisdictions were using TIF, it was causing school aids to increase. But the 2001 reforms changed that dynamic quite a bit. And so since 2001, you haven't seen very frequent TIF issues popping up, but you do get your annual list of special legislation requests. So our office actually would like to see some clarifications to various areas of TIF law. Right now, we're working with stakeholders to review some ideas. And once those are ready, we'll be bringing those forward to you. If not this session, then maybe next. So, and some of the special legislation bills that you'll receive, that you receive will involve maybe the 5-year rule, give an extension to the 5-year rule, or perhaps a duration extension for the entire TIF district. Or there's different municipalities that feel like they should be able to use a redevelopment district for a unique situation that maybe doesn't fit with the law's general blight requirements. So you'll see a lot of those, and then just a variety of exceptions to various limits. And out of the districts that reported in the 1,600 districts that reported for 2019, 116 of them reported being subject to a special law. The rest of my slides here are going to deal with data from our legislative report. So I'll just kind of go through them quickly and you can digest what you're interested in more later. But this chart shows the number of districts by type for statewide Greater Minnesota and the metro area. You can see that 97% of all districts fall in the big 3 categories of redevelopment, housing, and economic development. And most TIF districts are actually located in Greater Minnesota. 63% of TIF districts are located in Greater Minnesota. This chart, though, shows the revenues by district type, statewide, Greater Minnesota, and metro. And here you can see that the vast majority of the revenue is actually collected in the metro area, which makes some sense because valuations are higher in the metro and projects tend to be a little bit larger in scope. But there was 243 million statewide of tax increment revenues in 2019. These pie charts just show the distribution of the counts of TIF districts and the dollars by district type. And one thing to note here is that while redevelopment districts account for a little less than half of all districts, they account for almost 3/4 of all the increment. This chart shows kind of the history of TIF revenue in Minnesota since its inception. The blue line is actual dollars and the orange is inflation adjusted. You can see the exponential growth through the 80s, and that growth trend line started to level off a little bit after the 1990 reforms. And you can see the big impact of the 2001 tax reforms that cut tax increment revenues by 30% for 2002. But the trend continued to increase until 2008. And that's when kind of all the original TIF districts started hitting their duration limits. And so we had a wave of decertifications that brought the trend line down. It kind of leveled off in recent years here and is up the last couple of years. This is the same trend line except of the count of districts. It peaked slightly earlier than the dollars did in 2004 at over 2,200 districts, and seems to have leveled off over the last few years at right around 1,650 districts. And that's kind of, that leveling off is illustrated by these trend lines that have converged. The blue line is the number of new districts created each year. The dotted purple line is the number of decertifications each year. So those have kind of been converging over the last few years, although there was a little bit of a surprising dip in decertifications this last year. This chart might be of interest to many of you. It shows the impact of early decertification. So for all the districts that have decertified over the last 5 years, it shows what percentage decertified early. So 63% of redevelopment districts decertify early, almost 80% of housing districts. And even though economic development districts have a much shorter duration, there's still 30% of those that decertify early. And it's not just by a year or two, but the last column shows the average number of years early that those districts decertified. So it can be 10 or 11 years early for redevelopment and the housing districts. And that shows, some of this might show districts not getting off the ground. That could skew some of the averages, but a lot of this shows the impact of the 6-year rule. And then we also reported the total amount of TIF debt in the report. 64% of the little over $1.6 billion of debt is in pay-as-you-go obligations. And with pay-as-you-go obligations, the developer or a note holder is fronting all of the costs, and they're being repaid with tax increment each year as that increment is collected. So that puts the risk on the developer. Whereas with general obligation bonds, the risks are on the municipalities, and where if the increment wasn't sufficient, taxpayers would be on the hook. So general obligation bonds used to be much more popular. They're not as much so anymore, as the PAYGO debt is better in terms of risk for municipalities. And interfund loans have also become kind of a significant share of total debt. And then lastly, in 2019, there was $8.6 million returned to the counties to be redistributed as general taxes to the cities, counties, and school districts. And the return of increment might occur when a district just produces more money than what was needed, or some of these returned amounts could be to remedy problems or errors where money was spent in conflict with statutes. So that's kind of the whirlwind overview of TIF. And I'd just like to say that if the committee ever has issues that arises in the future, by all means, please feel free to contact us and let us share our expertise with you. So with that, if there's any questions, I'd be happy to address them.
Thank you, Mr. Nord. I suggest reading the report too. It was very helpful. Members, are there any questions for Mr. Nord? Representative Hertaus.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And Mr. Nord, just backing up a few slides to your comments about the debt service and the pay-as-you-go. Could you maybe just comment for the benefit of members in explaining TIF, those circumstances in which there may be some shared risk or kind of the public-private partnership kind of arrangement?
Sure.
Mr. Nord.
Sure, Madam Chair, Representative Hertaus. Yeah, with a pay-as-you-go obligation, the developer generally fronts all of the costs, and then that note, can be held by another note holder. But that way, if the tax increment revenue streams don't bear out with what was expected, just the developer or the note holder isn't going to be reimbursed for all of their expenses. And that's become the most common financing arrangement. Whereas with previously back in the 80s, it was much more common for the municipality to issue a general obligation bond or maybe a revenue bond, and then if the increments weren't sufficient, they would kind of be on the hook for those bonds. So that's kind of been the big trend over the last few years. And with an interfund loan, the municipality is essentially fronting the money, maybe with other funds that are available, and is repaying those other funds with tax increments. That's how the interfund loans work. But did that answer the question?
Representative Hertaus.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Mr. Nord. Yeah, it pretty much did, and I know how some of these things work, but just for the benefit of the members and the new members to the committee, I just was trying to touch a little bit on how some of these proposals are integral in terms of the financing and what makes it go or not go using TIF. And sometimes there is a little bit of a shared risk. You referred to it as interfund money, but sometimes I've been aware where some of the community issues part general obligation bonds and the other part is private sector risk.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Members, any other questions? Seeing none, thank you so much, Mr. Nord.